years. And we're now being recorded. Thank you, Allison. I've worked with the COC as the HMIS administrator for 15 years or so. And prior to that, I've worked with other COCs across the country, varying sizes, helping them to best leverage their HMIS to its fullest potential. And over that time, we've also seen HMIS grow from a very basic set of compliance requirements to offering tools to help with case management, to help track performance, and help your system achieve its goals to preventing, reducing, and ending homelessness. Prior to that, I came from a background in program development, monitoring, and evaluation in refugee services, mainly working in the New York area. These days I'm based in Texas, but you can always reach me online where I live. If Jesse's here, Jesse, could you unmute yourself and give a brief introduction?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'll be real quick. Jesse Johnson with WestHab. I'm going on my 21st year with WestHab, and I've been working with different iterations of Client Track for probably 18 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. That's a long time. and these days, Jesse and I, we co-chair our Data and Systems Committee, which oversees HMIS as well as the Coordinated Entry System, which is a big part of HMIS these days. So for today, brief overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to start with talking about our goals and objectives as a training today. We'll talk about what we mean by data collection requirements. And then we're going to focus the bulk of our time on the HMIS tools that you can use in order to help you monitor and improve your performance. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a very important type of tool called a monitoring and evaluation plan. This is something that program managers, program administrators will want to develop. You might have versions of this, but in the industry, it's often referred to as a monitoring and evaluation plan or framework. We'll get into that more at the very end. But again, the bulk of our time will be spent looking at the actual HMIS tools. So when we're talking about our goal here, it's pretty simple. We're looking to ensure that our homeless service and housing providers perform at the highest possible level. That sounds simple, I know. So how do we get there? Or how do we get you there? Well, one, we want to provide you with knowledge on your data collection requirements. Use providers need to know what your deliverables are, often spelled out in contracts, and know what performance expectations are. Not all that is outlined in a contract. It could be expectations that you set as a community, expectations that you set as an organization. But the first step is knowing this information. The next objective is ensuring that you know how to use the tools in HMIS to monitor this activity. To be able to do this, on your own at a pace and rhythm that makes sense. There's a big difference between what a permanent supportive housing program with 5 families needs to monitor versus, say, a very large shelter operation that has high turnover on a daily basis. Many different things that are different there. But there are the tools in HMIS to help you monitor that activity. And then lastly, what I referred to earlier is having a monitoring and evaluation plan to help you along the way to achieving this goal of improving your performance and operating at the highest level. So data collection requirements. And again, I'm speaking mainly to your project administrators here in leadership. But where do you find this information? None of this should come as a surprise, right? When it comes to the end of the year and you have a major report due, that's not when you learn what your data requirements are, what performance expectations are. This comes early on in the process when you've received your award letter, when a grant agreement or contract has been signed and delivered. This is where that information comes from. So we're talking mainly here about your leadership being responsible for knowing and disseminating this information to those who need to know in your organization. So, we could say, for example, a funder like DCMH will spell out in a contract, say the number and types of households that they expect you to serve over the course of the contract. They might even spell out expectations such as they expect 90% of those households who exit to permanent housing and remain housed. That's just an example that I made up there. But this is where you would start to look for those requirements. You would also want to look at, especially if you're COC funded, the rank and review documents. What Yoav covered earlier this month and as explained. It's a very important document. This is something that, again, program administrators, people that run your projects are responsible for knowing and sharing relevant information as needed. That document, which we're not going to cover again today, but we'll of course reference, talks about what those evaluation criteria are and how they'll objectively be evaluated across different types of projects. Another source of data collection requirements is something called the HMIS data dictionary. I'll say this isn't something that you're expected to know. It's a lengthy document that HUD puts out and updates periodically. This is something that I, as your administrator, is responsible for knowing and sharing and disseminating this information to the various providers and staff that use HMIS to collect the data. So this information is shared through the various trainings that are done, tutorials that are provided, maybe refresher trainings that we do throughout the course of the year. And of course, I may reference the HMIS data dictionary. There may be a link to it, but there's no expectation that every person that uses HMIS is to memorize this document. We take the information, from our funder at HUD, distill it down into actionable training material. And of course, within the HMIS system, we try to include tips and instructions there to help you along the way. This isn't, a full comprehensive list of all the requirements that you may have. Your organization certainly has requirements and standards. Your industry has standards. Some of these might be, best practices in case management, or best practices when it comes to, writing your case notes, things like that. There are so many requirements out there that program administrators need to identify and keep track of. So we've talked about some of these requirements. So we're going to start with looking at some of the HMIS tools and how we can look at some of these hard questions that we're trying to answer that relate to your performance. Some of the questions focus on, what I might call deliverables or outputs. These tend to be just raw numbers, like how many clients did you serve today? Or how many case notes did you enter over the course of the month? They're not the same as, say, an outcome, which is something that is measured, such as an increase or decrease in income, or percentage of clients who exit to permanent housing. That's what I mean by an outcome. But we're going to start with an easy question that just looks at the raw numbers. How many clients have you entered today? And a couple tools that we use to do that are one, the HMIS active enrollment screen. When you log into HMIS, you see on the dashboard your active enrollments as of today. And that's something that you can monitor, as users to ensure that your caseload is in the system. It's very simple to pull up that screen and check it. And there's also, if you want it in a report format, something that you can, say, run over the course of a different time period, like, did I enter all my clients in over the course of last month? Then that's something that you could turn to a report like the active client list report to answer that question. And we'll look at that shortly. But I want to talk about another question, which is, more broadly, are you tracking all the required activities for your clients? So again, we're thinking about outputs. And so there are so many different tools in the system. There are well over 100 reports. And this is where you have to think about, what is it for your particular project do you need to do? If we're talking about a shelter, one thing we're talking about are check-ins. Maybe on a nightly basis, are we checking in everyone who arrives? And so a tool that you might want to use is your current residence screen. If we're talking about permanent housing, are you documenting clients who are moving into housing? A screen that you could use, or a tool that you could use, would be the PH Cases move-in status screen. Service reports, case notes, etc. There's so many different tools that you can use. But the starting point is asking, what are you supposed to be recording? What are the activities you're supposed to track in HMIS for your clients? And if you don't know what those are, speak with your administrator, speak with your manager. But I'm going to go ahead and jump over to HMIS now and show some of these tools. If you would just give me one moment to do that. All right, great. So I've pulled up Client Track, our HMIS system, but I'm actually in a sandbox environment. So logging in here, I'm not going to have any live client data. All right, so here we are. We're in the system. Now, I referenced earlier, when you log in and you're on your home screen, seeing all your active enrollments at a glance. You can click here where it says active enrollments, as well as go over to the menu and click on that specifically here to view who you have in your projects. So let me go back to the top of the screen here, and I'll show you what some of our options are. So for example, I can filter specifically by a project or program that I want to look at. And then I can quickly review to see, are all my households entered here. And it can also sometimes be easier, instead of looking at every single household plus the family members, it may be helpful just to look at just the heads of household. So we can see here, specifically, there are 4 households. If I scroll down, it gives me that information on who those households are. Some descriptive information, like for my client, Larry David, He's a family with children, total of two family members. And that's something that you want to monitor however often it makes sense to monitor. And that would be something that you would then ultimately put into in writing in the form of your monitoring and evaluation plan, where it would spell out that you as staff who are responsible for entering data will periodically check to ensure that your clients are in HMIS. So just one example. I mentioned earlier also looking at the current resident screen. And this is used by shelters where clients are, yes, enrolled, but determining if they're present in the shelter on any given night, that's based on having a check-in record. So Jane Doe could be enrolled for an entire year, but throughout the year, she's only checked in for 180 nights. And that's how we know how much she's participating in the project. So here, again, under the housing screen, under current residents, we can answer that very basic question: are my clients in HMIS? So I have my shelter selected. As you see at the top, it says Coachman Family Center. It says I have 5 clients checked in as of today. And again, other tools here to help you show the information that you need to know. That tells me everyone who's checked in, but if I want to see just a count of households, I can say, just show me the head's household. And that gives me 3. And we'll come back to this screen later because it is helpful for tracking other pieces of information. I'm going to hop over to the report section, because while the previous 2 tools, current or active enrollments and current residents, really just focus on today, a report gives you more options. A report can let you look at different date ranges. It often gives you other options or parameters in terms of how you pull the data out of HMIS. The HMIS active client list is one of my favorite reports, so much so that it sits here above the menu and all the other hundreds of reports in the system. It's also a HUD compliant report. In a way, it's a light version of an annual performance report. It's not going to have all the data that an APR has, but it's based on similar parameters or similar specifications that our federal funders have given us. So as you can see here, if I wanted to look at, say, last month, I can quickly change the report to look at the previous month. I can scroll down and say, show me, not all my clients, but show me the clients that began their enrollment, because I know I had, say, 2 new clients arrive last month. So my expectation is, by looking at last month and who began their enrollment, I should see those 2 households. So a really good way to answer that question for yourself. And then, of course, you can scroll down, select your program, which I'll go ahead and do. In this case, I'm just selecting DCMH rental assistance. And what's nice about this is you can even filter this report based on who entered the data. So if you really wanted to know just the information that you entered in, you could say, show me just the records that I, Daniel, entered into HMIS over this period of time. And I'm just going to go ahead and run the report. Unlike an APR, this report runs pretty quickly, usually just a few seconds. Though if you're running the report, say, on the entire year, and you have a lot of clients, or maybe you're doing a WebEx and your internet connection is slow, it might take a little bit longer. But like I said, within a few seconds, the report runs and we get a big blank here. So I've just helped to answer or evaluate my question. Did I enter those 2 clients in last month? And the answer is no. Otherwise, they would appear here. So reports like this are really helpful. They're not limited to just program administrators. Anyone that has access to HMIS can use a report like this. Additionally, if you have a rhythm of asking this particular question or frequency of asking questions like this, say every Monday you come in and you want to know how many new clients were entered last week, that is something that you can set up as a scheduled recurring report. And I want to highlight this now early on. I've highlighted this in other presentations before, but it's always good to reiterate. So I'll go and say previous week. And assuming everything here is set the way I want it to run, I click on schedule. And basically you say how often you want this run. So I'll say I want this to run weekly. I want it to run every Wednesday, or whenever it makes sense. And you'll be the recipient, but you can always add another recipient or 2. And the default of this will be as a PDF. When you receive the email, you won't actually have the PDF in the email. You'll have to log into HMIS. And then that PDF will be downloaded to your computer. So never is client information or personally identifiable information transmitted over email when we're talking about scheduled reports. It's simply a notification in your inbox asking you to click on a link to then get that information out of HMIS. All right, I'm going to hop back over to the presentation. There we go. So we're going to move on to more nuanced or difficult questions to answer. And this is one that was referenced in the rank and review presentation earlier this month. And again, these are just some sample questions. This one is, will my renewal project be deemed for poor data quality? Very important that you, as say a program administrator, would want to ask. And probably not ask it at the end of the year, but ask it throughout the year at a frequency that makes sense. Again, some of your projects are very high volume, and you might want to ask this question on a regular basis, maybe if not weekly, maybe even monthly. Others, permanent supportive housing, low turnover, maybe quarterly makes the most sense. That's just something that you have to determine. But the tool that we're going to use is the HUD data quality report. So I'm going to hop back over to HMIS and pull up that particular report. So again, we're still under the report screen, under HMIS reports. data quality. Again, you have the option to set this up for a date range that makes the most sense, depending on how often you're monitoring. You'll want to have your organization selected, which it will be by default. You can skip over the grants, program, and grant section. But what you will want to do is select the program that you're looking to monitor. And the first thing that we're going to do here is we're just going to run the report, which I should have queued up already. I'll go ahead and run it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this report because I know I don't have that much data in our sandbox here. I'm going to run it on our previous fiscal year. And I'm going to go ahead and select the HMIS wrap. And again, it just takes a few seconds for the report to run and load. And now we can review the data. So as we can see here, what we have under these different sections, so Q2, Q3, and then a couple others after that, are sets of information. They're being evaluated one by one, and then you have an overall score. We can see here that we have a pretty high rate of missing information for our clients. Social Security number is missing for nearly all of them. And then we have one client missing date of birth, and because it is such a small volume program, that's a pretty high percentage, and that would need to be addressed. Say if our target is to have no more than 5 or less than 5% missing data for any one of these sections, we know that we're off. And again, this isn't something that you would want to wait to address at the end of the year or right before the rank and review process, but to monitor at a frequency that makes sense. So this is just a summary, this report here that I just ran. So I can't actually click on that number to get the information. So if you realize that this is information that say you found that the error rate was exceeding your target, you could then run the export of this report to give you the client level data. And that would tell you who are the clients that don't have the Social Security number. Who's that one client that has a missing date of birth? I believe I have that file saved, so let me just go over here to Files on the Server and pull that up.
This will take you back to all the reports you already ran.
Well, under report history, this shows you all the reports that you have run recently. And you can always pull that report up. That saves you some time if you're rechecking your data. And then if you are using a report to export data, right, because maybe that export has the client level information that you need to review, those exports will be under Files on Server.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Let me go down here and open this file up. And you can see the export has several different sections, obviously. A lot of files here. The first one that we were looking at was Q2. So I'm going to click on Data Quality 2. And that's that screen that we were looking at earlier, just giving us that summary again. If I want to see more detail, I click here where it says DQ2 Detail. And here are those clients. Again, this is a sandbox. These are not real clients. So here are those clients, their IDs. And I'll go ahead and say, I don't want to go through and correct a lot of data for the purposes of our training, but I'll just go ahead and say, let's fix this data issue of that one client who has a missing date of birth that's greatly skewing that one measure. So we'll take a look at client 39 and make that correction. Was it date of birth or was it social security number?
She was date of birth. I think she was both, but date of birth was the one you had
Oh,
focused.
okay. Let's go. So something's definitely off that we would need to fix.
Is that her roll date?
Maybe not.
Before.
Yeah, so there's definitely something strange here. The client, again, this is a sandbox. I probably pushed it to its limits. I have a client who was enrolled before they were born in one project. Definitely something strange going on here. But in a normal case where your report says something's missing and you go to correct it, it would be a pretty straightforward matter of then going to the record, entering what's missing, ensuring that it says full date of birth reported, and saving that.
Change that to like
Exactly.
Change that to 2013 or so.
Exactly. But that's just an example of how to use that particular report and identifying clients that need to have specific issues corrected. I'm going to jump to another set of difficult questions, questions that relate to, some of these questions relate to the ranking review process. So you might ask yourself, are my clients exiting to or retaining permanent housing? Are my clients exiting to homelessness? Might be another question that you're asking. Or are my clients who are exiting to permanent housing, are they later returning to homelessness? So there are tools that you can use to answer this. The first two regarding exits to a certain destination. The annual performance report is really helpful because not only does it tell you where clients are exiting to, but it does a comparison and gives you the rate. So, or what percentage of all your clients are exiting to permanent housing. And if you have a target, a target that might be set by a funder that says 90% of your clients should exit or retain permanent housing, the APR is the place to go to determine that. Of course, there are other ways to pull exit destination information out of HMIS, but again, the APR is a great tool for that comparison. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. There's also the System Performance Measure report, which is a unique tool and the only tool that we have to answer that last question, question 6, which is, are my clients returning to homelessness? Because what that System Performance Measure report does is it starts by looking at your program. That's the universe of clients it's going to start with, my clients in my program. And then it's going to compare their records across the system, their entries into other programs over time. And it'll tell you if someone then appeared in a shelter or street outreach, or maybe they enrolled into a program that says as an eligibility requirement, if you enter this program, you have to have been homeless in order to enter this program. And so that tells you, right away, if someone entered a program for folks who were homeless, clearly my client became homeless again. Now there's a bit of a grace period, and I'll go into that in a moment here, and how that report works. There's a 14-day window between, say, a client exiting one PH program and entering another PH program. That says, okay, we're not going to count that as a return to homelessness because we understand there are transitions that happen. Say a client leaves, rapid rehousing, and they receive an EHV, an emergency housing voucher. Well, that client didn't just become homeless again. No, they were just transitioning. But you might find that there are data quality issues where, yes, you had a client who then received a voucher, but maybe the person that entered the voucher didn't do it in a timely fashion. And that report is telling you incorrectly that a client returned to homelessness. So there are things like that you can only identify by running a report like the SysPM report, for short, SysPM. So we'll go ahead and take a look at those two reports now, because these are extremely helpful in answering these questions. So fortunately, I've already run this report, and I know many of you are already familiar with the APR, but we'll just take a look at it one more time, just in terms of how you set this up. And even though it's called an annual performance report, you can run this on different date ranges. If you want to just look at a monthly report, you can. There are a couple measures within the APR that are meant to do annual comparisons, and it can throw those off. But for the most part, an APR will return data on quarters, months, whatever other period that you enter. Grant year, exactly, year to date. One thing I want to highlight is when you're setting up this report, even though you do see this section here for grant program and grants, don't select that. If you select grants, it's not going to return all your clients. And I have to explain something here that I wish I didn't have to explain. But many years ago, when clients were being enrolled in HMIS, you could enroll them into a program, and then you could select the grants. And in some cases, you might have a program like DCMH rental assistance, And there were, at the time, many different grants or contracts in place that had later been, which at a later date were consolidated. But historically, you'll have clients enrolled in HMIS that may also have a grant specifically tied to their enrollment. In more recent years, that's not the case. Clients are only enrolled into a program or project without any specific grant tied to them. So I wish I could make this disappear from the screen. The only thing that I can say though is don't use it. And then you just select your program. And I do recommend that you leave this button checked at the bottom. It says generate validation file. This will provide you the client level information that you need. And in most cases, you always need that information if you want to do anything with your APR. So leave that checked. And when an APR runs, I'll hop over on files on servers. What it's doing is it's exporting data. And it's going to, on this screen, if you go over to files on server, you'll see a few files generated. The first one is called a preload file, which you can ignore. It's just basically staging the export. And it's saying, okay, this is us preparing to do the export. Perfect, we're ready. Next step is the export. This is the APR and all the different sections of the APR. And then the third file is the validation file with all the client level detail. All that information is also compiled and available right here within something called the APR Caper Review Tool, which lets you review, not in Excel, but right here on your screen, the APR, and lets you drill into the different sections and view the client level data, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do now. All right, so I'm looking here under my most recent APRs. It tells me the date that I ran it, the begin date, end date, the project. In some cases, you might run it on multiple projects, which will be listed here. And then it'll tell you if your drill down is available. The drill down is available if you select that validation option. And if you just ran your APR, this section, it'll say the APR is available, but it might not say the drill down is available yet, because the system might need a few more minutes to generate that third validation file. And once that's available, you can drill into the client level detail. So again, give the system 10, 15, in some cases it might take a little longer time to run the APR and the validation file. And when you see something like what I have on my screen where it says the APR is ready and the drill down is available, then that's when I would suggest that you open up the APR. So I'll go ahead and open up this one that I ran for a HUD transitional housing project. And as you wait with anticipation, you can think about all the questions that you're hoping to answer with your APR. All right, here we go. Hopefully everybody can see this. You know, sometimes it can be hard to follow along, especially if your screen's small. But here's the report. We have some basic information at the top that identifies the report that we ran, as well as a top-level count of the active clients and active households. So obviously we can see here that there are quite a few families, given the difference here in number of households and the greater number of clients total. And there are so many different questions that you can answer, but we're going to start just by looking at those exit questions. Are clients exiting to permanent housing? So I'm going to scroll down. I believe it's Q23, so let me get down to that section. So here we are, Q23, exit destination. We can see it's broken up into different subsections of clients who exited to homeless situations, of which there were 2 here. Institutional situations, subtotal 1. Temporary situations, which there are 0. And then further down to the bottom, we have permanent situations. So what you can do here in order to understand what percentage of your clients are exiting to permanent housing is you can do some simple math. Take that number of permanent housing destinations, which it looks like we have 28, and then we can divide that by the grand total, multiply that by 100, which I can't do that in my head, but 28 divided by 32 times 100 would give you that answer. Does anybody want to do that and tell me what that is? 28 divided by 32.
I can find that.
Okay. Okay.
87.5.
87.5. So we're not too far off. You saw earlier in the presentation, I listed as an example that the target would be 90. So we're not too far off. So say we're in the middle of our year, our grant year. They're still done. Maybe there were some bumps in the road early on, but you can see that you're not too far off, and there's an opportunity there to perhaps implement some interventions to help you get a higher rate of exit to permanent housing. The other thing, of course, you want to do here is review the data quality to ensure that what you see here is the reality. So all this information that you see here, wherever you see a number listed, you can click on it and it will tell you who those clients are. So one thing you might want to review is if you have clients that are appearing under other or doesn't know, data not collected, review that, because that is a gap in your understanding. What happened there? Maybe someone didn't know at the time, but now you do. And maybe that person did follow up with their case manager and you know they obtained permanent housing. That's something to correct. But this is something that you want to review, periodically to make sure that what's being reported on an APR will be used to rank your project for renewing its funding is accurate. I'll go ahead and just click on this 2 here, the 2 clients that exited to permanent shelter. or sorry, exited to emergency shelter. Just to show you how this report allows you to drill into the numbers. And that can then help you to evaluate data quality, help you do follow-up if needed. And there we go. There are the two listed right here. You'll scroll down and see those two IDs. All right. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the system performance measures report to answer that question about returns to homelessness now. And just to make sure that everyone knows where to find the report and knows how to run it. So over on the reports menu here on the left, I'm going to click on HMIS reports. And near the bottom of this menu, you'll see system performance measures. You might see next to some of these reports a year. And that's just referring to the version of the report. It's not saying that this is a report that you can only use for fiscal year 2024. It's just, that's the most recent version. These reports typically are updated every couple of years. So don't worry too much about that. We usually only keep the most recent version of any report in the system. So for those of you that participated in the rank and review training earlier this month, you already did see this, but it doesn't hurt to see it again. I'm going to look at specifically performance measure 2. This is the one that looks at returns to homelessness. I'm going to make sure that my organization is selected. I'm just going to go ahead and select all my organizations. I'm going to select the program that clients are enrolled into, but again, I'm not going to select grants, because if I select grants, there's a good chance that I'm not going to see all my clients. That's an outdated field. All right, so I have DCMH route selected. I'm going to look at I just have it set to look at the previous fiscal year. And I'm going to run the report. All right. Well, this was a bad example because I don't have any clients that return to homelessness. No, that's exactly what you would hope to see. So let me run this report on a different project. Hopefully I have less optimal results. All right, let's try this one more time. All right. So this makes a little bit more sense. So what's happening here is what the report is doing is it's looking at the start date of our report. And then it's going to look at clients who exited to permanent housing in the 2 years prior. Excuse me. It'll look at clients that exited to permanent housing in the 2 years prior to that. And then looking to see if they returned to homelessness. Which makes sense, because if you were to run the report on, say, this year, the report is looking at returns to homelessness in 2 years. You need more time for comparison. So it's always going to go back 2 years, look at everyone who exited to permanent housing, and then it breaks it up in these time frames. Okay, did they return to homelessness in less than 6 months, 6 months, less than 6 months, 6 months to 12 months, et cetera, et cetera. That distinction isn't so important when it comes to the rank and review. It's more looking at the overall percentage of returns within that entire time frame of 2 years. So if you want to see who were these returns to homelessness, and one, verify that that's accurate, because there are some cases where there might be a data entry error where a client did not return to homelessness. Maybe they were entered incorrectly into another program that you operate, and that's the reason for the supposed return. So you really want to review this in detail. So I'm going to drill into this by clicking on these plus signs here on the left, and it's going to show me all the exits, all the PH exits. You could even export this to Excel if you're more comfortable doing that, and then you could do some filtering in Excel. But what I have to do here is just scroll down until I get to a result that then shows on the right the return to homelessness. In this case, the return is indicated by the client who exited in March 2022 to a rental situation, but who then returned about 1.5 years later to emergency shelter. So that stay in emergency shelter is considered a return to homelessness. That might be something that you want to review on a case-by-case basis, each of these. So maybe you'd want to check the enrollment, see, maybe the client came in, but did they actually stay? Maybe there was a crisis. Maybe there was a dispute with a landlord or a family member, but the client, did they actually stay in the shelter? That might be something that you want to review very carefully, since this impacts the rank and review process for renewal funding. Take a very close look at all this. Don't just assume it's accurate. We see a couple more returns to homelessness by presence in an emergency shelter. Then we see that example that I mentioned earlier, where a client exited to permanent housing, and let's say in this example, the client left transitional housing. They were exiting to the voucher program. And there's a 14-day grace period where, as long as that emergency housing voucher or other PH project enrolls the client within 14 days, this report says, okay, that was not a return to homelessness, because we understand transfers occur. But what we see here is there's a gap of 3 months between when this exit happened and when they were ultimately enrolled in EHV. And logically, the report can only understand that as, in that period of time, we don't know, we can only assume the client experienced homelessness again because it was outside that 14-day window. So what you'd want to do is check to see, was that exit date correct? Is that actually when they left your program? And is this date of admission into EHV accurate? If someone was late in doing this, that could cause the error. And maybe that should be corrected, and that can easily be done by the project staff going in here and changing the entry date to fall, you know, within 14 days of this exit, you know, if that's actually what happened. So when you're formulating your plan of monitoring and evaluating your data, you're really going to think about, you know, who's running a report like this. You know, say I'm running this report on my TH project. I'm the administrator for TH. But I'm seeing a problem that's not with my program, but with another program's data. How do I address that? Who do I communicate that with? Do I need to escalate this? Do I need to bring this up in our next director level meeting? How does this work? And that's something that you just have to determine internally, what works best for your organization in terms of communicating and resolving these issues. And that's something that needs to be documented, or what I would recommend you document in something like a monitoring and evaluation plan. So there might be some more examples, but those are the two main examples I want to point out here. Is, you know, really looking at that information closely, not just assuming it's accurate, but evaluate it closely, you know, question it, check the client record, ask staff, pull the files, look at them closely. You know, especially if we're talking about a measure here that isn't just useful, good to know information, but information that has a real impact on your project's funding and viability in the future. Are we running out of time?
No, we have until 12, but I do want to be
Okay. Okay, great. I just want to make sure we're still on schedule, which we are. I'm gonna hop back over to the presentation. And I'm going to move on now to the question that, again, ties into your rank and review, and that is, are my clients increasing their income? You know, obviously some of you on the call might not be on a COC project, COC funded projects. Income might not be something that you necessarily measure. But for those that do, there's a couple tools that you can use. You can use the APR Q19. You can also do, it's a much simpler percentage, but the system performance measure, specifically measure 4, will give you this information. To give my voice a break, I'm going to see if Jesse, because I know you've run these reports and this is something that you looked at, could you speak to using these reports, and maybe if you have a preference versus one or the other?
Sure. I think for those users who want to drill down quicker, the SysPM report would be a better choice. And if Daniel could run an example of that for measure 4. Again, this is my preference. These SysPM reports will give you some information back in regards to a percentage. So if you compare the percentage of those who increase their income based on what Yoav showed are the performance measures. Here we go. So depending on what your program's performance measure is, or the acceptable, whether it's rapid rehousing or permanent supported housing, this quick report tells you what that percentage is. And it does then give you the total number of clients. So one of the good things here is if you think that this number is low, it gives you the ability to drill in to see who those clients are that increased. 4.1 is earned income, and 4.3 is a total change of all income. Again, I don't know how many people on this call today were on the training that Yoav did, but he also shared in that training what the percentages are for increasing income for rapid rehousing and permanent supporting housing to get a maximum of 5 points and all the way down to 0 points. So, running this report is a quick way to see where your program falls within those guidelines. And as Daniel has said today, the most important thing is if you think something is off, is to drill down and look and see who those clients are. And as Daniel is showing you here on the screen, it shows you what the income was depending on the period that you entered, what the income was at the beginning and what it currently is. So you can see who's increasing or who's decreasing. And if you look at some of the numbers and they don't appear correct, then they could be changed and updated in HMIS on a case-by-case basis.
All right, thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and as you see here, you're getting lots of information. It's showing you the date of that last assessment. If you're not seeing a recent dates, clearly there's a problem there. If you're reviewing this information with staff and they're saying, no, there was an increase, but it's not being listed here, maybe their client's not listed here as one with an increase in income, there you go. There's something that needs to be addressed. Can I ask you, Jesse, how often do you look at this particular measure?
All service coordinators, I ask them to look at this monthly.
Oh, that's great. Yep, and monthly might not work for everybody. You might do it more frequently or less frequently. Different people might be responsible. Just depends on your organization, how you run, and what capacity you have.
One of the reasons, sorry, Daniel, one of the reasons that we try to do it monthly is, whether it's the data quality report that Daniel showed you earlier, or it's this report, one of the other things it may do is also give you feedback to a staff that needs additional training. Because what you might see is that the error that occur might be one specific staff member, and that then gives the supervisor the ability to then meet with that staff member and clarify what needs to be done. So, if you wait 3 months and you do it quarterly, and this same staff member wasn't sure and continues to make errors, now you have to correct 3 months worth of errors. So we use it as a feedback mechanism to also help us train staff that need additional training.
Yeah, and also on that same note, I know when we get to the rank and review process, programs that have a lower number of households in them are, experience the most variation in their score based on an error or a lack of information on behalf of one client. If your program is meant for 20 people, each one of those people, when they change, 5% of your score changes. So you want to make sure that the smaller your program is, the more carefully you are combing through what you can do to improve the record for each client, because that's going to have a big return on investment of your time in doing that when it comes to rank and review time. If you have a larger project, some of our projects have 100 households. If there's a mistake on one household, that costs you 1 percentage point right? So the smaller your program is, the more those individual errors on individual cases impact the overall score. So I just want to point that out. That is something that can sneak up on people. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. The more folks you have in your program, the more a single error will, not impact you. But the smaller your program is, the more a single error can impact the performance of your program. And everyone's hustling and busting their tails to serve these clients, and so we want to make sure that the score reflects that effort.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see why the system performance measures is optimal, because when we look at APR and how it's looking at income changes, it asks in a very nuanced way. It's looking at, well, let's look at sources, right? Changes in the sources, and then income changes between the start and the latest status, or for clients that left, start and exit. So it's really breaking it down, maybe to a degree that our funders like to know, but that for the rank and review process, and generally speaking, might be overkill. But the APR is just chock full of so much information. So I'm not going to, not dismissing it outright. I'm just saying that there's a lot here. A lot of it's obviously relevant to our funders and to you. So definitely get familiar with the APR. And if you find something there that you can use, even if a funder says, if a funder says this isn't necessarily something that we are looking at, but you are going to look at to measure performance, take advantage of it. All right, something else that I wanted to point out too, there are certainly lots of other activities that you track in HMIS, and there are other tools, not necessarily an APR or some performance measure that you can use. But we were just talking about making sure that income is being entered in for your COC funded projects. Those income changes are being reflected on, well, comparing annual assessments or exits over time. So the HMIS annual assessment tool is something that's really helpful, something that you and staff should think about using. And what you can do with this tool is say, show me for my organization. So I'll go ahead and select West tab here. Say, show me if I have any overdue annual assessments. Again, this is not real data. But let me go ahead and just look at one particular program just to narrow this down a little bit more. All right. So there we go. It says here there's no records here of clients that have overdue annual assessments. That would be great. That's ideal. But you can also use this to say, show me if they're not overdue yet, but they're coming up, right? So pretty soon, we're going to have clients that will have an annual assessment due, because we're within this 60-day window. In other words, the client has an enrollment anniversary. Like our first client here on the list, their anniversary is April 14th of being in the project. So HUD says you can enter this annual assessment needs to be entered in starting 30 days before or 30 days after that anniversary. So there's some flexibility there because obviously you have to schedule meetings with clients and it's not always going to fall right there on their anniversary dates. So you could use this tool to stay ahead and say, okay, I know that I have 5 clients that are within that window of needing an annual assessment done. They're not overdue yet, great. So let's get these folks on the calendar. So one thing to talk about internally is who's using this tool, who's responsible for looking at this, getting clients, scheduled that might not have annual assessments done. Maybe who's checking to see if there are any overdue assessments. Another tool that is very helpful ties back to what we talked about earlier when it comes to, are your numbers accurate? And that's making sure, specifically for permanent housing projects, that your clients in permanent housing, once they're moved into housing, have a move-in date. So looks like we have 4 clients who have been enrolled in permanent housing that don't have a move-in date yet. So who's reviewing this? And what do you do when you see a case like Yogi Bear, who has been enrolled for a long time now, several years it looks like, and they had yet to move in. So what happened here? Did this client actually leave the project? Did the move-in date never entered? What happened here? Because this is going to impact your performance. It's going to show that and who didn't move in. So maybe you're not getting credit for a resident who's actually a resident. It's going to impact other numbers of other metrics as well. So who's looking at this? Who's going to address this? Very important to consider. Another tool that I want to highlight, since we're on this screen, is, and this is more broadly, going beyond this, COC rank and review a little bit, but is your project compliant with coordinated entry? When it comes to getting your clients into coordinated entry and assessed in order to be prioritized for housing. So if I hop back over here and I look at this menu on the left, we have our active enrollments, and then underneath that we have something called the CE monitoring tool. And this is going to look at specifically emergency shelter, transitional housing, and street outreach projects. And do those projects have their clients enrolled in coordinated entry? So I'm going to scroll down, and right now I'm not looking at a specific project. It's just looking at all that, all under that criteria. And it looks like, if I look at just this one, HUD transitional housing, I have 2 enrolled and 32 not enrolled. And if I remember correctly, that should be 100% for transitional housing. No?
What should it be on?
You off for transitional?
The policy for transitional is that they're enrolled when they're ready to.
Okay.
On.
All right.
But
So,
for coachman, everyone should be enrolled.
got it. Okay. So we'll look at coachman. So for coachman, it's a little bit more straightforward, where all these clients in coachman should be enrolled. So what's going on here? So we could go into these records and see what's happening. Okay, who are these clients that are not enrolled, and let's get them all enrolled. So who's looking at this? That's a question. Is it your CE assessors? Do you have someone at your organization that is tasked with being in charge for CE compliance? Something to think about, something to document, and have in your plan of action. In addition, what you can do is, not just a matter of are they enrolled, which I can say, let's look at all the clients who are enrolled. Say we're on top of that. Yes, we're getting all of our clients enrolled into coordinated entry, but do they have a chat? And so this is going to show me clients without a chat. And it's going to look at, if I hover over this, it'll give me some more information. It'll say clients that do not have a chat within the past year. Because per policy, chats do expire after a year.
Yes, and this is a good time to mention
Sure.
this. I say this very frequently, and yet I still have people trying to tell me that it is not so. So a chat is good for either 1 year or when there's a life event that would alter their chat score. So if people are entering the household who have additional disabilities or other responses would be changed on the chat, it's really important to update that. I've had people tell me that no matter what happens in the household, they don't think they have to update it until that year mark, or that they can't update it until that year mark. And that's not factual. If there's anything happening with the household that could change their chat score, their chat needs to be updated, because there's no magical way for Jo Marie and Latanya and others on the team to magically know that this person was added to the household, or a person had a tragic accident and has become more disabled, or wasn't disabled before and now they are. So all of these things need to be updated because they impact the client's chat score. Things like changes in age will automatically be tabulated by the system. You get a chat point if you're over age 62. Things like that, Client Track will do automatically. Things like something happened to the client that you would only know as the client service person, the system doesn't have any way to automatically know that. Even if you've notified DSS that something's going on with the family, it doesn't mean that someone here goes into HMIS and changes that for you. That record is still your responsibility to maintain and make sure that it is accurate. So it's up to a year, or when there's a major change with the household that needs to be reported.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and this tool, it's looking at enrollments in projects and then comparing them with what we have in terms of coordinated entry enrollments and chats. You can also do this monitoring from another screen, which is helpful for drop-in shelters. And that's over here on the housing screen when you're looking at current residents. So you could have 300 people enrolled in your drop-in shelter, but on any given night, you only have 30, right? So on a nightly basis, this might be something that you work into your monitoring evaluation plan. Once curfews pass, everyone's been checked in. Now that you have, in this case, we only have five clients in our sandbox, but let's look at this. All right. So who's enrolled in coordinated entry? Well, that's better yet, who's not enrolled in coordinated entry? So we get our results back. It says we have 4 who are not enrolled in coordinated entry. Also for drop-in shelters, this is to help you with prioritization of your engagement efforts. You can look here to see say you have a client who's staying at your shelter for the first night, but you want to make sure that any client, if they've been in shelter 14 or more days in the past year, meaning they're a frequent user of the shelter system, if that person's there in your shelter, even if it's their very first night, and you see that they're a frequent user, to engage with them, to get them enrolled into coordinated entry. So that's what this is used for, to help drop-in centers, especially high volume drop-in shelters, identify clients, even if they're brand new to their shelter, if they're frequent users of the shelter system, and to engage with them so they don't slip through the cracks. And of course, you can also use this to show clients who are enrolled in coordinated entry who don't have a chat, which we don't. That's great. Even though we do have clients that are not enrolled in coordinated entry, at least the one that we do have does have a chat. And very easily from this screen too, say you're the coordinated entry assessor, you've been tasked with the responsibility to monitor this. You can go in, select the client, take a closer look at their record, review when their last chat was done, and if it's accurate, if it reflects, if there have been some changes, if it reflects those changes. All right, and the last thing that I'm going to show related to coordinated entry, which has more to do with the housing providers, which would be the bulk of you on the call today, would be the CE benchmark report. So I'm going to go ahead and show you where that is. So it's under the reports screen, enrollment reports, CE benchmark report. Quick tip, if you're ever having a hard time finding a report, you can always go up to, or anything for that matter in HMIS, you click on the search bar, you can type what you're looking for, and it'll show you where it is, and you can just click on it to launch it. I try not to move things around too much. I don't want to confuse anybody. So once a report lives under a specific screen, it's going to live there, usually indefinitely. And then another thing you can do, just another tip, so you don't have to dig around. So you don't have to dig around too much. If this is a report that you're going to use a lot, you can make it a favorite. So you just click on that star over here on the left, and you can then set this report as a favorite. And then there it is. It's going to be right here on the left under your favorites. And there are all the other recent places that I've been in the system. All right, so the CE benchmark report. I'm not very optimistic that this report's going to have very much data, so I'm not going to run it here on our training site. But I'm just going to recap what Yoav showed before, and that's running this report on specific date range, which is going to look at the referrals that are made during this date range. You'll then want to select your provider as the refer to provider. Which I'll go ahead and do here. Actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to run the report because I think I might have some information or some dummy clients in the system that have been referred to Turning Point. And then once you have your provider selected and the date range for looking at referrals to evaluate, you can then click on report. All right, great. So we see we do have some information here for Turning Point where we have 4 clients that have been referred, or 4 referrals that have been made. The outcome, and then number of days that it took to achieve that outcome. And then as time goes on, these clients, enroll into a project. Again, this isn't live data, so it's not a great example, but we would have more data here showing, and once they've been accepted into the project, how many days did it take for them to then start in the project from that referral date? How many days did it take from the point that they were accepted, the referral was accepted, to then start? And then how many days did it take then to move into permanent housing after that. So that's definitely something that you want to review to ensure that this is accurate. And you can also look at a different part of the system to review this information as well. Again, that's giving you a look at referrals over a broad period of time, which is great. Letting you look at the specific dates, make sure they're accurate. But you can also do some of that monitoring right here from the home screen, looking under incoming referrals. So you'd want to look at, do you have any new referrals coming in? And making sure that the status is being updated. So this is showing me when we're looking at incoming referrals, by default, it's showing me the referrals that have not been processed yet. Once a referral has been accepted or rejected, it moves into the category of being processed. So let's say we have all of our incoming referrals accounted for, they've been acknowledged, and we have all of our referrals that have been accepted or rejected listed here. Terrific. But one thing you want to make sure that's happening is that this information is being updated in a timely fashion, and then making sure that clients, once they're accepted into the program, then have corresponding enrollments in the program as well, because as you saw from the benchmark report, it's looking at that information as well. It's not just looking at the referrals, that's just a starting point, but it's then looking at, are they then enrolling into the program? How long did it take them to enroll? And eventually move into a housing unit. Was there anything, Yoav, that you wanted to touch on? I know you spoke on this a lot earlier this month, but anything that you wanted to reiterate about the CE benchmark report or updating referral statuses?
No, I
Okay.
think you covered it.
All right.
Daniel, can you just show them where they can check incoming referrals, just so that they can see if they don't already know?
Absolutely. And just so you know, that referrals, when they do come in, you should be receiving an email, right? The idea is that these referrals are being made. There's also a corresponding email that's coming from the DSS coordinated entry team. So you shouldn't just be a surprise when you log into HMIS and see them sitting here.
Another thing to remind people is they won't get referrals unless they request them now.
Exactly. And if you have openings in your project and they're not being filled, someone needs to be responsible for going into HMIS and making that request for a referral. We did a training on this recently, but it's worth mentioning now, because you don't want to have a backlog simply because someone didn't know that they were responsible for actually requesting referrals. So make that part of your plan too, going forward when it comes to CE monitoring and performance. Who are the contacts? Who's responsible for all these different projects that receive referrals? Who knows when a unit's available? Communicating that to the right people who then request a referral from DSS. That communication chain is very important. Having backups in that chain of communication is really important in case someone's on vacation and there's a unit that needs to be filled. There's no reason to have any delays. But yeah, very important to cover that information here. A couple other things that I mentioned earlier, just when it comes to your monitoring and evaluation plan, I'm going to turn back to the presentation to talk about that now. Now, this isn't necessarily something that case managers and assessors are working on, but this is more geared toward your project, your program management staff, is having a tool like this. Doesn't matter what you call it. In the industry, and what I refer to it here as is a monitoring and evaluation plan. And it's simply a tool. It's a tool used by your project and program management to effectively implement, to make sure that your project is performing well. Another thing that's really helpful about this tool is it can help to illustrate and be used when you're meeting with teams. It can help to illustrate the relationships between your project level objectives, the different inputs that go into that, like your staff, like your budget, like your trainings, the outputs and outcomes for your project, the number of people you serve, the success rate in permanent housing, and ultimately your community impact. It can be really helpful just in terms of illustrating all those relationships. And of course, it's also helpful in terms of promoting transparency and accountability. Like I said, throughout the training and talking about these different evaluation questions we have, who's responsible for it? Who's responsible for running the report to evaluate those findings and sharing those findings? Who's then responsible for taking the actions needed to correct data quality? Or who's responsible for, if data quality is not the issue, but it's a matter of policy, who's perhaps responsible for reviewing the policy and maybe making adjustments or deciding that interventions are needed to help your clients achieve the outcomes that you've set. So there are lots of different components to a monitoring and evaluation plan. You want to list out all your objectives. And some of those I've referenced in this training today, like the number and types of households you want to serve over the course of a year, the number or the target of clients that you want to achieve certain outcomes. The idea is to list out all those objectives that you're then going to stay on top of and monitor. So for example here, ensure clients achieve permanent housing. You can even say ensure all clients achieve permanent housing. That is your objective. How are we going to measure this? What's the indicator of this? It's going to be the exit destination, having a permanent housing exit destination recorded in HMIS. You might want to also then define what your current performance is or your baseline. Like we saw earlier with our one project, that baseline was 87%. But maybe your target is higher, 90, 95%. So having that defined, what's your baseline as of today? What's your target as of the future? Where do you want to get to? And then having a plan in place for monitoring. So what is the source of information that you're looking at? Who's collecting it? How's it being collected? How often? Who's responsible? And we know with our example here with exit destination, that particular piece of information comes from HMIS, but it doesn't just come from HMIS, it comes from the staff, it comes from the case managers who are reporting it. It's coming from the clients who are reporting this information to you, or it's coming from the actual outcome of you working with the clients to achieve permanent housing. Having that all spelled out clearly is really helpful. And then defining what you mean by evaluating. What does that mean? So how are staff going to use this information to then determine, are you on track to meet your target? And if not, what action? And if not, what action do you need to take? And you can even spell out actions here. They could even be hypothetical actions that you might need to take. And Jesse mentioned one earlier, and that was maybe you've noticed a deficiency in, the staff training. Maybe they're coming on board and they don't have all the information in their toolkit to help their clients. Well, there's an intervention right then and there, right? To make sure that all staff are trained in order to help clients, say, with exit planning, successful exit planning. And then if you can think of this as a loop, taking the evaluation, taking your findings, taking those actions, incorporating that into basically a cycle of continuous improvement, right? You're going to tweak what you're doing, and then, right, you have a process in place where maybe monthly you're looking at your numbers. Well, you're going to check next month to see, okay, did that intervention have an impact? Are we seeing tangible results of the changes that we've made? And again, this is just very, very broad. I can't get into specifically, what are interventions that would help you achieve any of these different objectives that you have. That's beyond my area of expertise. But it's not beyond the area of expertise of your contacts here at DSS, of the leadership in your organizations, of the other resources that can be made available to you through trainings. So this is just something to think about, something to work on. And if you're working on this internally as, say, the program administrator, and you'd like feedback with this, definitely feel free to reach out. Excuse me. And if you'd like some feedback, I'd be more than happy to provide feedback on your plan and just help you refine it so that it's an actionable tool for you and your organization to help you stay on top of performance. I'm going to stop talking now because I have to. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you all. Ask any questions you have. You're welcome to unmute yourself, just being considerate of any background noise. Or if you'd like to, you're welcome to type in your questions. So I'll give folks a minute to think about that and ask questions. Or if Jesse, if there's anything that you wanted to
yeah, sure. While we're waiting, thank you, Daniel, for walking us all through on Client Track. And as everybody on the call can imagine, the most important thing, everybody's busy. The most important thing is finding the time to review these reports as needed on a regular basis. They're there, scheduling things in your calendar, and just making sure that you're checking them on a regular basis. As Daniel said, there's over 100 different reports. And what I would suggest is when you find the time, if you can find the time, is just run the reports and see what's in there. Until you see what's in the reports, you don't know, what you might be looking for. So again, just schedule them on a regular basis, fine tune the ones that you need to really focus on, and just check them on a weekly basis if you can, monthly, as needed. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Yes, please don't be shy. I know the session's being recorded, but you're not being judged or graded on the quality of your questions. So we'd be happy to answer them. And they do add a lot to our learning because we find out more about what you folks want to know. So do you have any questions? You could put it in the chat or you could unmute yourself and just ask. All right, well, if you're feeling shy and you do have a question, please do email it to us so that we can help you out. And if you're thinking about this training and how you would apply it, and that generates questions, we're happy to answer them. So Agnes has said, how often do you recommend doing a report? We're recommending that you check your data monthly, if that makes sense for your program. If you have a large amount of people, you may want to do it more often. If you have a small amount of people, you may want to do it less often. But you definitely want to be sure to, when it comes to exit destinations, that's really one piece that once people leave, we can't go back and ask them most of the time. And, you get, I don't know what to call it, I guess, credit or, an improved performance outcome if you're able to record where clients departed to. We're not talking about specific address. We want something like reunited with family in Yonkers, or, had, became incarcerated, all kinds of different things that, resolve their homelessness on their own with private rental, like whatever it is. Where did they go? Just tell us, because it does impact our program's performance to the COC as a whole, and our whole COC's performance to HUD. So I know that most people know this, but for the sake of maybe enlightening some folks who don't know this information, is when we want new funding for new programs, we are judged on the basis of the performance of our current programs, and the quality of our application to HUD. So we're constantly identifying different populations, groups of people, programs we'd like to develop, but HUD's not going to fund any of it unless we can demonstrate excellent performance in terms of how our current programs are running and how we're running as a COC, in helping our programs do their best, and in creating equity and creating a system that works for everyone within it. So Agnes said, confirm exit destination on a client. Right. So that's what I'm really looking for, is you can tell us what was the outcome. Did they leave to go to permanent housing and didn't need our resources? Did they leave to take advantage of a job opportunity in another state? Like whatever that might be, record it so that you get the credit for having served that client right up until they left. Some folks aren't going to tell us. They're going to give us a gesture that's less than friendly on their way out the door, maybe. We can't help that, but for the people that we are able to engage with, we want to make sure that, we have as much information from them as possible.
Allison, I just wanted to also jump in on the question of how often you should do reports for agencies on the call that operate shelters. Reports, it was said before, a month is good, but reports like the CE check and the chat, you should do that weekly at minimum, because you have to remember that if you're missing a coordinated entry enrollment or a chat, your client may have qualified but never got referred because those things weren't done yet. So you don't want to wait a month to go by and realize that a client in your shelter has no CE enrollment and no chat, because that's potentially 4 weeks that went by that they could have been referred but didn't. So
Right.
Reports like that should be done at least weekly.
All right, thank you. And all of this, you can imagine, would be incredibly helpful to have documented, right? For each of your projects, to have that documented in a plan, so that there's no surprise what needs to be done and what the expectations are, and who's responsible for these different activities, like running the reports and then following up with clients as needed, or as a program administrator deciding even if data quality is terrific and you're still not meeting that target, what do you need to do to get there? Right? Just having that all outlined in a plan of action, like a monitoring evaluation plan, can really help you up your game and get your project where you need it. All right. Well, thank you all very much for the time today.
Thank you very much to our presenters, Jesse Johnson from West Hab and Daniel Gore, our HMIS administrator. Our whole team is here to help you, so let us know how we can do that. And I hope your day is excellent. Try to spend some time outside this week because we're going to have a rainy weekend. But for now, it's beautiful and will improve your outlook. So get out there and have a good one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your help.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.
Farewell.